I modified this, I guess you'd call it a sandpaper holder. It's a rubber deal. It's got a concave on one side and round on the other. I flattened off the other side. I also cut it way down really small so that it would be a detail sander for getting into these very tight spaces under the microscope here. I'll just give you an idea of how I use it, just like this. I can get real close and into really tight spots. Can't get in every place with it, but it's pretty good, and it's nice to be able to see it under the microscope while I'm doing it, just to give you an idea how I do that. And like I said, I'm not going to film all of that, but that's basically how I'm doing it. I can really see the detail and see what needs to be sanded and what doesn't, you know, in the tight areas like this. I'm ready to rough out the neck profile on this glue-up blank that we've got here. I've got this all sanded smooth, so all we're going to do now is just the rough profile of the area where the fretboard would go.
Lately the signs upon your face match the signs on the road I take. Slow down, don't turn left, dead end ahead.
Well, that turned out just fine. Now, I had a giant blade in here, by the way. I don't know if you can tell how big the blade is, but it's at least a 3/4 inch blade. But that's fine for just cutting straight lines. And up here, I just, you know, plunged the blade in a few times to cut that curve. And that curve is not exact. That's just a rough curve. So we got plenty of room to go from there. I think what I'll do next is profile the rest of this neck, which will include cutting off a lot of this corners to kind of round it off. And I can do that here on the saw as well, but I got to get it all drawn up first.
The caution light is lit as we head for the last exit, but I wonder what I'd find if I could drive through your mind.
I wonder what I'd find if I could drive through your mind. Would the road be rough or paved? Could your love for me be saved? A highway of gravel.
Well, I ain't gonna lie to you, that didn't work out the way I was expecting. That blade caught that a little bit more and pulled it in a little more here. I am not 100% sure that it's salvageable. I think it is, but it may not be. Boy, I can't believe it. Stuff happens when you're doing this, and that's the first time I've ever had that really happen. But this got caught somewhere on the front edge of this, and the corner got caught down in this little thing down in here, right where the groove is, and I couldn't get it to move, and it just, everything just kept sucking it in, and it was just one of them 100%, you know, perfect storms is what it really was. Doggone it. It may still be okay, but right now it don't look that good. I have this set at about 800 thousandths of an inch, and I'm going to thin the peg head down to that right now, and then we'll thickness sand it to the final dimensions.
Either way, it's the same old love, but I wonder what I'd find if I could drive through your mind.
As I'm pulling a load of freight, I think of you with each passing sign I see. The road ahead looks rough, and the travel will sure be tough, but I wonder what I'd find if I could drive through your mind.
I wonder what I'd find if I could drive through your mind. Would the road be rough or paved? Should your love for me be saved? A highway, gravel road, either way it's the same old load. But I wonder what I'd find if I could drive through your mind.
I stopped there because I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. I forgot to drill the hole right here. So before I make that cut into that hole, I want to drill the hole down through there. So we'll go to the drill press and do that. Finally got me a new chuck for this drill. It drills much better now. The other chuck was brand new, but it just didn't ever work well. It just was always had a wobble in it. It just didn't run true. This one runs nice. This is a Jacobs chuck. It's a little smaller, but it's worth it to have the trueness.
Is there someone around the turn that makes your little heart burn? There's no way he could love you like I do.
Pretty nice. It's just about done. We got to cut a little bit more up in there yet, but otherwise it's just about done. We'll go to the fine bladed bandsaw to cut the rest of that.
Even though the light is lit and we're at the last exit, I still wonder what I'd find if I could drive through your mind.
I wonder what I'd find if I could drive through your mind. Would the road be rough or paved? Could your love for me be saved? A highway or gravel road, either way it's the same old road. But I wonder what I'd find if I could drive through your mind. You won't find it on a well-traveled highway, not even on a dusty gravel road. And you have to want to be there when you find it, or it's not on any maps I know. Out across the field.
Well, that's a bit fidgety and tedious, but I believe that's going to be really nice. Well, we've got the neck joint all matched up. This jig holds it in place, and this holds it at the right height for the bridge. So basically we put it on here, we push it down. I also take this straight edge and I verify that down the length of the neck that it's right on the money, and it looks perfect. It's repeatable. I can take it off, put it back on, and it goes right in the right place. So that means it's time to glue it on. So that's what we're going to do. So I'm getting the glue all over the neck joint. And again, this is not where you don't need a ton of glue. You just want 100% coverage. You don't want anything uncovered. And you just take your time with this because it's important that you get it 100% coverage. It doesn't need too much back here, but some. And just enough to make contact good. We should be perfect there. That looks real good. Again, you can't check these kinds of things too many times. Looks right on the money. I don't see, it's not even off by a hair. It's perfect. And the top, it's sitting on that brace, so it's perfect right there. You can't do any better than perfect, so I'm calling that good. We're going to let that set for 24 hours. Going to put the little pins in here to lock the neck in. I don't even think you need them, to be perfectly honest with you, but it's just an extra fail-safe. I'm going to put a little glue in each one. Just so you know, I've also cut a groove down through each dowel so that as you drive it in, the glue and air has a place to escape. Otherwise, it's pretty difficult to drive them in, actually. I'm going to wipe the glue around the hole pretty well, you know, to make sure the glue's spread around pretty well. And a little bit on the dowel pin too. And then we'll just more or less tap it into place. Believe that's all the way home. Think that'll do. We'll cut those off flush.
Steep and rocky trail when you cross that little creek.
I know you can't hear me, but I almost forgot to sign the inside, so I'm going to sign it and date it right now.
You'll see that vine-covered church on the hill, that vine-covered church above the valley, where the congregation gathered to pray, built with their hands from the forest, now stands as a marker for the grave.
My friends, I've spent almost all day just getting ready to do the inlay on the peg head of this mandolin. And you might think, why should it take most of the day? When I say most of the day, it's now 2:23. I got in the shop this morning about 7:30, something like that. Took about an hour for lunch, don't get me wrong, but in that hour, of course, I was answering emails. So, I mean, when I say I take an hour for lunch, basically just to eat while I'm answering emails. What have I been doing in that length of time? Well, I started out by making up an overlay of the Peghead, even testing different designs and things like that in a software program called Inkscape. You know, I'm making it to exact size so that I could make patterns and things. And in fact, I'll show you what that pattern looks like that I did make. I did make an actual template, a routing template that I'm calling it, and I made it out of 1/8 inch thick plywood to begin with. And I'm going to try to use that routing template to route out the pattern in the Peghead or the Mandolin. I'll show you what that looks like in a moment. I've already got it glued to the Peghead and we'll go over there in just a minute. But in addition to that, I needed to work on this Proxxon router base some more. You know, I've been told already quite a few times, in fact, that I should have a clear base on this. Well, I have had clear bases before, and personally I don't like them at all because the kind of clear plastic generally has so much static in it that all your fine sawdust that I'm working with, and keep in mind we're talking very fine sawdust, it just sticks to it like a magnet and it coats it in a heartbeat, so that doesn't help anything. So you can't see through it anyway. In addition, that clear plastic scratches really badly over time, and before long you can't see through it anyway. And in fact, that little white plastic base that I have been using on my Dremel router was perfect, even with that little tiny hole. And in fact, that tiny hole is better than this big hole. And you think, why? Well, you got to remember, the stuff I'm routing out is tiny. We're down here in these little tiny letters. I don't need a very big hole to see that letter, number one. The reason the big hole doesn't work is there's no good way to measure the height of your bit because your tool falls down in this hole when you're trying to measure the bit. The little hole is actually very simple to measure. I can just put it right across there. It spans the hole and I can measure the height of my bit to the 1,000th of an inch, which is what I really need to do. So on this one, what I'm having to do is lay a platform across there and subtract the height of that platform, which is 19,000ths of an inch if you're keeping score. So whatever the depth of this is, I have to set it to that, but I have to subtract off the 19,000ths that this tool is sitting on top of. It's just not easy being me. Oh wait, I forgot. I made another tool for this. And that is this plastic jobber here, and you can see the hole through it. And you think, well, what is that for? Well, that holds my air hose, and I'll show you how that hooks up when we move over to the other place too. So the air hose will be blowing at a 45-degree angle down at the bit to keep the bit area clean of sawdust. It's only 2:30 in the afternoon. I feel like I got a lot done. No progress on the instrument yet, but here we go. Okay, so here we are at the area where we're going to do the routing. This white that you see on here is just a template. It's just a pattern, and I'm going to take the router and go inside that template and route all that out. Now, there's no way to put a collar or any kind of thing on those bits. The cutter will cut this white just as easy as it'll cut the black. I'm just going to have to use my glasses and get in there and just try not to hit the white and just use it as a guide. That's the best I can do. I have a very tiny bit on here, which is tinier than I normally use, which may be a mistake, but I think I'm going to have to. You can see the hose is being held by that plastic, and it seems to work fine. So I'll be hooking up the air compressor here in a moment. I'll get my safety gear on, and we'll get started. Well, the setup was fine, everything is fine, except this bit. It's a tiny little bit, and it just isn't made to cut very big areas. It just isn't working very well, so I'm going to have to reset with a different bit.
The siding and shingles are tattered. The steeple leans slightly to the right, and though all the windows are shattered, you can still hear them singing at night. The brothers and sisters who worship gather in that holy place still, though they lie at rest in the valley beneath that vine-covered church on the hill. That vine-covered church above the valley, where the congregation gathered to pray, built with their hands from the forest, now stands as a marker for the grave.
Well, I have to tell you, as far as doing it by hand, that was the best and easiest I've ever done. If it works, I mean, it looks like it should work. Man, that was a way easier to operate. I'm wondering if I missed a spot right there, so I'm just going to turn it on real quick and hit that one little spot, but otherwise it looks fine. As far as I can tell, it looks good. Now the tricky thing is, can I get this off? I kind of went nuts with the glue stick and really glued it down good. I'm thinking I can either put my heating thing on here and it'll come loose, or just use a hot air gun. I think it'll come loose, but I don't know that. Well, I skipped ahead quite a bit. I had the laser cutter cut out all the letters and the flower, and then I inlaid them under the microscope here because they're very detailed. There's probably 16 or 17 pieces of wood just in the yellow alone, and these pieces are delicate, and then there's a lot of little pieces here on the leaves, probably 15 leaves and different things, all total parts, I mean. And so anyway, doing it under the microscope really does help. You can distinguish which one of those leaves goes where and that sort of thing much better. Anyway, I got it all in place, got it all CA glued in there, and now I'm just going to do a light sanding on the face of this to bring it all level. I digress here just a moment. People often ask me, where do I get all the plastic that I use for my templates and things? Well, just a cheap little booklet that was made at Bell for a communications workshop. They were throwing away tons of these different bindings and things, and I just grabbed them up, and you know, they're in different thicknesses. This is much thicker. I think this was actually over some, well, I don't remember. It was just some much thicker binder, and I cut the covers off of them, you know, saved all the plastic. Now, you know, that was probably close to 30 years ago, so I don't have a ton of it left, but I still have a little bit left. Today, this is my mixing board for my epoxy fill that I'm going to use here. You know, I often say I don't like to use epoxies, and I typically don't, but on a fill situation like this, it's not a bad place to use epoxy, especially when you've got this black soot stuff here. This stuff is incredibly black. So I'm going to mix it into the epoxy and use that as my fill for this. My hope is that it won't shrink as much as the other fills, and I won't have to fill it so many times, etc. and so forth. And I've had good results with using epoxy and this stuff in the past. This is just a general type available Loctite epoxy. So we'll see how it works. I think it should be fine. I was going to use the plastic to mix this on, then I decided against it and decided to just use this throwaway cardboard. First thing I have to do is cut the ends off of these epoxy bottles. No, actually the first thing I got to do is put on my close-up glasses. Up until just a few years ago, I never had to say that, but now I do. And I'm cutting the small tip off of there. Hole's pretty small. I'm going to need a fair amount of this stuff, and wouldn't you know, it's only coming out on the left side, it's not coming out on the right side. How does that happen? I don't know, but I'm going to press more on the left side now. Still getting lots out of the round side and not so much out of the flat side. What a bummer. That's not the way it's supposed to work. I can't believe my luck. I mean, I'm still getting tons out of the right and nothing out of the left. Hardly anything out of the left. And it's just as open as it can be. It's got an air pocket or something, and what a pain. Now I'm starting to get some out of the left, but I'm still getting plenty out of the right. There we go. Now I've caught up maybe Maybe. Okay, well that's way more than I ever needed. I'm telling you folks, it's just not easy being me. And there you go, I plugged it up. I wiped it off first so they wouldn't be crust contaminated. And now I get to mix this all up and hopefully it's in some sort of a proportion that will work. Now I get to add some of the black gook here. This stuff is incredibly black, so I don't want to add a ton of it. I have a feeling it will make it very black. A little bit goes a long way on this. I'd say mission accomplished. That looks pretty black to me. Let's see what happens. Way more than I need, I know that. You notice I've got the peg head laying pretty flat. I've got it propped up so that it's almost perfectly level. It's not, I wouldn't say it's perfect, but it's close. And that's to help keep it even and let it find its way down in there without running out. And there's lots of little air bubbles popping up. I'm hoping I can get them all worked out. Moving it around in different directions, trying to suck the stuff in and out of the holes. You can create an air pocket under it very easily. That seems to be working. Now I'll smooth it off and see if I can see any voids. Well, that looks as good as it's going to look on that go around. I have a ton of waste here, mainly because it just wouldn't cooperate, as you saw. Anyone need any extra fill? I'd be glad to ship it to you. I doubt by the time you get it, it'll be worth using though. Oh well. And before I get 1,000 comments on I created my own problem there by not taking this label off, you were right. I should have stored this like this over the past few days. The air bubbles would have risen to the top, and when I squeezed it out, it wouldn't have been so much of an issue. But, you know, I didn't pay any attention to the fact that that label was on there and I couldn't really see there was air bubbles. So there you go. Yes, I know how to fix the problem. Inevitably, when I use my heat gun, some smart aleck always says, well, the reason that did that is you burned it with your heat gun. Really? I was hoping that would make that get rid of the tackiness a little bit faster. It's basically dry. It's a 5-minute epoxy and it's had 30 minutes to dry, although admittedly one of those components was probably a little more than the other, the way it turned out. But regardless, it should be fine here in a little while. I'm going to give it another 15 or 20 minutes. It's still just at least a little bit tacky, but not very bad. Well, after the heat treatment and another 10 or 15 minutes to dry, it doesn't feel tacky at all now. It feels pretty smooth, pretty hard. So I'm going to take it over to the belt sander and just kind of knock this off. Well, that was pretty much a fail. Apparently underneath there it's still kind of sticky. So I'm going to give it some more time. The epoxy filler seemed to do its job pretty well. If I take it to the belt sander, it gets hot really fast and it seems to get sticky. So if I just use this, it stays dry and feels fine. So I'm just using this. I've got a very rough sandpaper on here right now to knock off the thickness. Slowly it's revealing the secret there. It's going to look real nice, I think, once we get her cleaned up.
That vine-covered church above the valley.
Well, that's looking really fine now. Now I'll go to the 220 and clean that up.
Where the congregation gathered to pray. Bill.
Looks pretty darn fine to me. Well, I'm pretty darn happy with that. Got a lot of detail in it. Hopefully you can see the detail up close. You can see a little bit of fill around it like that, but not too bad. Gonna look really nice once we get some finish over it and everything. Very pretty. Hope you like it. In the past, I've always held this in my arm between my legs and things, and then routed this with two hands. With the arthritis and all the other ailments these days, I've got it locked into the vise here. That'll hold it more steady for me. I'm using a actual inlay cutter, a downward spiral inlay cutter, which is the 1/8 inch bit. And that's what I'm going to try cutting this with. I haven't tried this on a mandolin. I did try it on the guitar and it worked great on the guitar. So the problem is with the mandolin here, I know the first pass isn't going to be deep enough, but you know, 2 passes doesn't bother me too much as long as it does a good clean job. So we'll put on the gear and here we go.
Their hands from the forest now stands as a marker for the graves. It still stands as a marker for the graves.
Well, just like all new procedures, that had a few little bugs in it. For one thing, going the other way, I have to push it away from me. I like pulling it to me. I had to push it, otherwise it would climb cut. And I didn't get the best cut on this side, but this is harder wood too, so we'll work on that. But I'm going to turn it over and see what I can do on the other side right now. Because of the angle of the peg head, it's going to move it in a different direction here. So we'll have to readjust the camera. Well, there's some positive and some negative of having the vise hold it. I'll be perfectly honest with you. It was okay, but I was uncomfortable that way more so than when I hold it between my legs. I feel like I've got a better control that way, so I'm going to go back to that method. Yeah, I don't know why, but I'm looking at it at a better angle, and I can just work better that way. So that's the way I'm going to finish it. I believe I have it set at final depth, so we're going to go around it one last time, and hopefully this will do the job. Suddenly it doesn't feel like it's cutting, so I don't know what the deal is. It doesn't feel like it's going to depth, but maybe it is. I don't know.
The other night I woke up from a dream. This dream to me so really seemed. And in this dream I came upon...
I will say one thing about this cutter that is a negative is that it builds up glue on the tip on this application here. And you have to chip it off every so often. Otherwise it seems pretty good.
A man who left no footprints.
It catches if you let it go the wrong way, that's for sure. I don't know. I've had some bits you can go the wrong way and no problem at all. Other bits, not so much. This is one of those that's not so much. Well, I'm going to have to do some looking and seeing if this is good enough or if we're going to have to do some more. I'm not really sure at this point. It's pretty close. So we'll see. Regarding this Canada mandolin, I have got the binding slots rough routed. And when I say rough routed, I mean they're approximately correct, but I have to route out all of the detail now. And there's really no good way to do that. It's just, I do it with a Dremel tool holding it in my hand. Totally freehand. Here we go. Wish me luck. Here I go.
Dressed all in white, we walked a long way. For those in need, we'd often stop and pray. Our journey guided only by the night, and yet we walked as if there was a line. Then he said, walk the straight and narrow every day. Then he said, head straight toward the light and never stray.
I feel like I need to thin this down just a little bit more before I actually cut the groove around this, so that's what I'm doing.
He said, lend a helping hand along your way. Then he said, find the love of God on Judgment Day. it's in the master's plan. We must learn to lend a hand along the way, so we may find the love of God on Judgment Day. Then he said, walk the straight and narrow every day.
Learn one way to skin a cat. Yeah. You won't let me carve you, I'll sand your butt off.
Then he said, head straight toward the light and never stray. Then he said, lend a helping hand along the way. Then he said, find the love of God on Judgment Day.
Never did that before. That ain't good. I slipped and busted a little piece right here on the back, but thank goodness it'll glue up and look fine when I'm done, because that part gets solid black anyway. Nobody will ever know it or see it, but it just bugs me. Doggone it anyway. So now I need to borrow the tight bond real quick. Well, another day has dawned here in the shop working on the Canada Mandolin. I have spent hours working on all the trim around here, trying to, get it just perfect. In other words, it's the binding slot that I'm talking about, not really the trim itself. But anyway, it's just very tedious, time consuming, done with chisels, done with the Dremel tool by hand. There's really no mechanical way that I can think of to do it, other than maybe a CNC machine or something. This is the binding I'm planning to put on this. Why I do these things to myself, I have no idea, because this is real wood binding. I'm going to try to get real wood binding to bend around this. And the operative word is try. I have no idea. I've never tried to bend wood that tight before, but at least I gave myself the best possible chance because I picked sycamore versus the maple that I bent on the guitar. The maple, even on the guitar, the maple was stiff and tough to bend around the tightest curves. There is just no way, in my opinion, that you could ever get the maple to bend that tight around there, unless you made the maple really thin, of course. This is not that thin. This is about, why do I have to guess? Let's just tell you how thick it is. I've forgotten how thick it is. I do so many things and so many interruptions. It's 95 thousandths. That's basically 1/10 of an inch thick. 1/8 of an inch is fairly thick material, so this is just below that. This is 1/10 of an inch thick, 95 thousandths, roughly 2¼ millimeters, something like that is about what this is. Because it's sycamore, at least I think we have a chance. It is really pretty binding. I don't know if the camera will focus on that, but you can see there's a lot of decoration in the binding itself. And that's what I want to bring out with the clear finish on this. Now, I am going to bend this right now, but I'm not going to glue it in place until I've already put the staining and at least one coat of lacquer on this, because I learned my lesson that the stain and everything gets on this stuff and messes this up. So we live and we learn. I am at least going to attempt to bend this before I do all that. Here we go. Well, my friends, I've got the bending iron heated up to the temperature, and off camera I thought, well, I'll just see if this is going to work. And I already tried to bend just the very tightest bend on this, and it started out fine, but then it just on its own separated right there. Get the camera to focus, you can see how it's separated. But believe it or not, that's easy to bend back. So I think I can bend that back, go ahead and glue that and keep going. And that's what I think I'm going to do. So I'm going to pause the camera for a minute. I'm going to glue this back in place, let it set itself up, then we'll move on from there. I don't think it'll be that big a deal to bend this because that didn't bend that hard. And even with that little minor separation there, I think we might have it figured out. We'll see. By the way, shout out to my daughter Rochelle. She got me this shirt. Okay, fine. All right, so I've got some brand new glue that I have never used. I just opened it, just took the lid off of it just a moment ago, have not squirted a drop out of it yet. It comes with this little applicator tip. I'm going to put that on there. I'm going to use this. Someone recommended this. It's called Superphatic. Apparently it's as thin as CA glue, but I think it's more similar to Titebond in the way it works, or maybe to my canopy glue. But anyway, I'm going to try that on this and see what happens. It may be a mistake to try something on something as critical as this, but here we go. Well, it is very thin, I'll say that. It looks like it went down in there good, and that's one of the keys, is that it sucked itself down in that little crack as far as it will go. Now I have to come up with a clamping method for this. I'll show you what that looks like. And this is the little clamping method I came up with. I just used a X-Acto knife handle, which pretty much matched the radius I'm bending, and then I just have a spring clamp on there. And with the glue in there, it's holding perfectly. I think it'll be fine. I'm just going to let that set up for the recommended amount of time, and we'll move on. Well, my friends, I've been working quite a bit off camera on the Canada Mandolin. Doesn't look like much progress. I put in the cross piece right here to fill in that gap between the top and the neck. That's made out of elk antler in this case. I have bent the wood binding and got it to bend without really any issues at all. I amazed myself on that. That's for the top. So I'll show you how I did that on the back a little bit more. I showed just a piece of it on the top. We'll show you a little bit more about the technique for that now that I kind of know what the technique is. Presently, I'm putting on the fretboard extension. So here we go.
He said walk the straight and narrow every day.
The screw is just a temporary clamp is really what it amounts to. And we've got everything else up in pretty good shape on this. This might still be just a little tiny bit high, but I can always take that down with my finger planes and scrapers and things. Otherwise, that's up in pretty good shape. I'm trying to work to get the whole mandolin up in pretty good shape so that I can stain it and varnish it prior to putting on this. I've thought of a problem though, and that is that no matter how good you get this, typically you have to recarve it to match your binding and everything. And so there will be a bunch of touch-up work around this edge. And again, against this wood binding with, dye and stuff. And I don't know, at least it'll be touch-up, and maybe I can control it well enough where I don't get it on this too much. That's the goal, is to try to protect this wood binding so that this dye doesn't get on it. We'll just have to see how that goes. Once again, my friends, I've jumped ahead quite a bit. I have cut the hole through here. Just to show you how I did that, I just took this router bit. It's got a taper on it, and I just get in here like so, and I just do it by hand and work it out and just take my time with it. You don't get in any hurry on this kind of thing. The slot was cut in there on the table saw when we made the neck, so that's not a problem. I also made the truss rod, brazed on a nut on the back end here. I made the nut. I tapped this and threaded it and then just brazed it on there so it couldn't unscrew itself. There is a very slight underbow to the truss rod, as you can see there, so that when it's set down in here, as you tighten this up, that pulls that underbow up, and that's what gives the neck the strength. And then we will also put fill pieces above and below this. Like there'll be a tiny fill piece under here, a tiny fill piece under here, and then a larger fill piece over the top of the whole thing. And all of that will be glued in so that as soon as you start tightening this will start putting stress on the neck so that it lifts the neck up in the middle. But anyway, right now I'm just going to enlarge this hole a little bit more because it's still a little bit tight to get the nut on there.
Then he said, head straight toward the light and never astray. Then he said, lend a helping hand along.
That's looking pretty good. I think we're going to be able to make that work. I'm going to have to cut this off a little more square because of the angle and everything. My back wall is angled in like this, and I need it to go straight down so that the nut has something very flat to go up against. Made some more progress on the Canada Mandolin. I've got the truss rod fitting pretty much like a glove. I've put in a bottom piece as a filler piece under the truss rod. The truss rod is underbowed, and therefore when you tighten it, that bow will straighten out, lift up the center. This is the part that's going to set right on that center and, lift up. And so we're ready, just about ready, that is, to glue in that part. One last fit up here, and I think we're good to go. So you can see it pretty much fits it like a glove there. No extra air or anything around it. We can just glue it in place along the sides, being careful not to get glue on the bottom where the truss rod is. We should be good to go. I've even drawn a pencil line, so really I only have to get glue on the part below the pencil line there, which is pretty small actually, but yet it's almost 1/4 of an inch glue surface on both sides. So we should be good. Here we go.
Then he said, find the love of God on Judgment Day.
Well, there's what she looks like, all glued in place. Setting up plenty proud of the top of the neck there, but that's okay. That's very easy to knock off with either the finger planes or a saw or something like that. No problem at all. I've decided while I'm going to give this overnight to set up, I might as well go ahead and fill this area with epoxy and just fill that in. So we'll squirt out some epoxy here. That ought to be plenty. Doesn't take a ton. Well, that ought to be plenty. Just to be on the safe side, I'll poke at it with a toothpick and see if we can get it to go down in there, because sometimes the little air pockets get caught around it, and it looks like that might be the case here. When I poke it, I can see holes. Yeah, it's definitely going down in there a little better. Might as well fill this deep hole where we put the screw in with epoxy too. Why not? That looks good. I think that'll be fine. Don't see it going down in there anymore. It wasn't much of a void to begin with. It was pretty airtight. We'll give that overnight to do its thing. We'll start on some other project. Working on the Canada mandolin and doing detail work, getting ready to put the peghead binding on it. There's just lots of little minor detail stuff. No matter how accurate you cut things, you'll always, need fine-tuning, if you will, especially in these kind of intricate areas. I've almost got it fine-tuned already. If you notice right about here, there's just a little bit of a hump. I want a perfectly straight line before it makes that curl around on that line there. And there's just the tiniest bit of a hump. I've already taken off a lot of it, but I just thought I'd show you the technique. When you get into a detailed spot like that, it's very difficult to change that and to do it accurately and without making other problems, if you will. So I'm showing you my technique. I'm taking this flat file. This is actually a half round file, and I'm taking the flat side of it and I'm using it like a draw knife, and we call it a draw filing technique. And I'm actually turning it this direction. Get the camera to focus if I can. And basically you do it just like this, actually taking the file sideways. And it's called draw filing. It's a real thing. It's not something I made up. People do this. And the advantages of it is that it actually does cut pretty fast. You can perhaps see the dust coming off of there. I don't know if the camera can get that or not. But there's quite a bit of dust coming off. It gives you real good file control. About the only angle I have to worry about is this angle, this direction. And so, if you get a hold of it on both sides, you can pretty much control that. And then this will let me slide right over that bump and just wear that bump down to the point where it goes straight into that curl. It's getting close. I've been working on it about 10 minutes already, off camera. It was a lot worse. And now it's just about there. And then you can get longer like that so that all the filing looks the same. But this is the kind of detail that you don't often see when you're building something like this. That old saying, the devil is in the detail, couldn't be more true. And especially when you're dealing with things that are this intricate. Your eye goes right to this kind of spot, and anything that's not really close to perfect is just obvious all the time. So that's why you really want to spend your time on these kinds of areas. I'm going to route the binding slots for this peg head, and I've got everything set up. Using the Proxxon router base again, I've got that slick tape over this so it's really smooth, and this guide that I made. I'm using one of the StewMac inlay cutters in here, or at least one. It's very similar to that. I actually think I bought these off of eBay, but they're almost identical. It's a spiral down cut type bit. We're about ready to give it a shot. I've tested it, of course, on scrap wood, and so everything should be fine. Here we go.
On my last day on earth, when my...
I've got it fairly well roughed out on the edges and everything. Then around this detail, I have to do it by hand. And I mean, I could do it with knives and things, but it just takes so long. And this is already set to the perfect depth. So if I can use this tool, at least one dimension is already taken care of, and that's the depth. The tricky part is to keep this thing from grabbing and jumping and jerking all over the place. And, you know, all I can say is, you know, good luck to me, because here I go.
words will be heard.
That's working fine. It's just that I don't have enough light. I need more light so that I can do a better job. So I got to get me a light set up here.
I want you there to hear the story I will tell. Before my spirit rises high above the white cloud-filled sky, please be there to hear my last words on earth. My last words on earth will be spoken.
Well, we're in the ballpark. We'll have to see how it goes from here. Got a lot of handwork to do now. Well, it's about time I start applying some of the finishes to this. Before I put that real wood binding on here, I'm planning to stain it and then lacquer it, at least a light coat of lacquer over it. Surprise! I like that color. I think I'm just gonna leave it that color. It's one of those colors that I can actually see. I don't think you'd just be colorblind if you couldn't see this. I think you'd be blind. It's that bright. I think it's even brighter in person than it is on camera. Now, the unique thing about this mandolin in color is that it's going to be the first mandolin that I've dyed the rose on the back yellow. So I'm leaving the area around here lighter because I want this to be a lighter area so the rose stands out. Obviously, this is all going to get darkened and everything. There will be a yellow rose to match the yellow rose on the peg head. It'll be the first yellow rose mandolin that I've built. So here we go. For those of you who have not seen me do this before, the yellow is just the highlight color for the sunburst that will be over the top of all of this. And the yellow will get toned down considerably. It won't look yellow exactly. It'll be more of a golden, yellow, brown type color in the sunburst. It just works well. These are, I refer to them as alcohol-based dyes. That's the way I think of them, because you can take denatured alcohol and lighten them all up. These are Phoebing's dyes. They're leather dyes, and they're the alcohol base. Be sure you get the alcohol base. Do not get the oil base, at least for this type of work. I've never ever messed with the oil-based dyes, except my wife has used them on some of her leather stuff that she's done with horses, and I can tell you they are much more dense. These are a very light dye. They add no weight to your instrument, and I don't think they would affect the tone of your instrument at all because of the nature of the product. The oil dye probably wouldn't really affect the tone much either, but it's a much more dense dye, I will tell you that for sure. Much thicker and much heavier. And I have no idea what the oil-based dyes would do to wood and how they would react to wood, because I've never tried it. I love how the yellow brings out that curl in the wood. You can really see the curl
The way I do these sunbursts, it's a multi-step process. This is just step one. Technically, you don't really have to coat the whole thing in yellow. That's just the way I start out. You could probably get by with just doing the centers of the instrument in yellow. I kind of feel like I get a little better blend by coating everything, and then I can work back through the same level of color through everything. And I don't know. That could just be in my mind. It may be just as easy to do it the other way. And for those of you who are new viewers watching this, I am totally colorblind, at least according to my eye doctor. Profoundly colorblind is his exact words. So, you know, while I can see color to some degree, I apparently don't see them correctly. So, you know, I'm sure this looks completely crazy to most of you out there, but I have done this many, many times, and so I kind of know what to expect and what's going to happen here, and you'll just need to follow along and hope for the best, because that's what I do. I'm good at hoping for the best when it comes to color. Off camera, I have spent hours and hours detailing this mandolin, getting everything ready for this. You know, I didn't show all that because it's just a lot of work, sanding all of the little nooks and crannies, filing all the little nooks and crannies, and just trying to make it perfect. Typically, whenever you do that, as you're putting these stains on, you'll see all the little minor defects that you missed. And so there's a good chance that I'll be going back over it to fix little minor details. Though right at the moment it looks pretty good. I'm not really seeing much. Again, like on these spots here, the reason I yellow these spots is because I will highlight certain areas as I sunburst it. We will use the same method for some of the sunbursting, but then we will come back and airbrush the final sunbursting. Okay, I think I've got that coated well enough. I'm going to move back to the rose now, and I'm going to actually dye the rose the colors that I want it to be, which will be the yellow and the green for the stem. Now, I don't know why, but I'm going to use a different yellow, still made by Phoebings, but it's in a different bottle, and it's a newer dye. And what I have found over the years that they could potentially change their formulas a little bit, and they look a little different. So kind of to that end, I'm hoping this one will look a little different than the other yellow, and I'm going to put this yellow on the rose. It may be exactly the same. I'll find out here in a minute.